Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next lecture, which is going to be on web applications and web security. So, basically, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Now, sometimes web applications and web security can be a little bit dry. I will do my best to try to explain as much as I possibly can when it comes to web security. The challenge is the web security that it's so broad. There's so many different aspects of web security, so sometimes it can be tough to try to cover everything. But this is going to be just a general idea. Of some of the things that are involved when it comes to web application security, and we'll cover it the best way we can. So, a web application is basically it's an application that runs on a remote server, and it's accessed through a client, just like you would your laptop, your desktop, whatever it is. There's a remote server out there in the internet world, and you're attempting to connect to it. So a web app can take the form of services like Microsoft Office's 365, or something that's a little bit more common to everybody, like Netflix, Hulu, that kind of thing. So basically, when it comes to this, the application is presented through the client interface on your browser, or other piece of software. So when it comes to web applications, they've become really popular on several different fronts over the last few years, because they provide so much flexibility and power. So apps they can be written to offer like very unique services to a specific platform, and they um, can be a platform to be able to offer power across architectures. I mean, they're very versatile. So when mobile computing, is brought into play, like the picture becomes even more interesting, because apps are created to run locally, whereas others are, just pure web apps. So web apps are designed to kind of be run across platforms, and native apps are designed or targeted towards a specific platform or environment. So a lot of the software packages downloaded from places like Google Play Store are a part of a web application. So that's what we're going to kind of start covering over the course of this particular lecture. And again, we'll try to dig into these as much as possible, but I still it's gonna be a very high view of web application security. All right, so let's start talking about kind of exploring the client server relationship here. And here's the thing: what you got to understand, you got to understand that there's types, the types of individuals who are going to be interacting with a web server. Typically you're going to kind of break them down into three classes, each its own specific needs and concerns. Um, One, you're going to have server administrators, and basically these are people that are concerned with the safety and the security and the functioning of the web server from an operational standpoint. So, they try to configure the system and remove vulnerabilities before they become problems. Um, the thing is, a lot of server administrators, it's become almost an impossible task, because web servers and applications that run on them have become so complex and powerful, and there's so many unknown and undocumented features. So being a server administrator can really be a challenge in this day of age. Um, then you have something like network administrators. These are typically people that are more concerned with infrastructure and the network functioning as a whole, instead of a specific server. And they look for operational security issues, and try to deal with those as they arise. Um, then you have end users that are usually on the client side of things. Um, and they're usually your consumer, the user of whatever information or application that's out there. And typically, um, these people don't really think about the technical details as much as getting the services that they want, and trying to achieve something. So making this more of an issue is the simple fact that web browsers that clients usually are using to access the content it can allow threats to kind of bypass the company's firewall and kind of have a free ride into the internal network here. So that's kind of the danger when it comes to end users. Um, then you have application administrators, and usually these people are kind of fulfilling that role. That's usually responsible for managing and configuring the web application. Um, and these people usually focus on and trying to ensure that the web application runs smoothly and continues to meet performance goals. So that's sort of kind of their role in this. And then you have the application developer. So usually application or web developers, they specialize in programming, developing and upgrading web applications. And they can either focus on client side or server side technologies depending on the environment and the operating system. So this is just kind of a quick look at the different relationships as far as client server web applications, and I would try to remember those. Just some of the main goals, people that are involved in web application security and the environment. All right, so let's talk about web servers a little bit more. And start kind of before we can kind of start thinking about analyzing and looking at the security of web servers, as well as applications, you kind of have to look at the web server itself. And the simplest way to look at this is a web server is a software package, and it's designed to deliver files and content over HTTP. I mean, so these files are typically delivered in response to requests, just like you're sitting in front of your browser on your internet. You're surfing around, and and then the server will respond to that client request. So web servers are they're part of a bigger family of internet and intranet based programs, and they deliver content like emails, files, web pages, and all kinds of other stuff. So um, while web servers, they deliver some basic types of content like HTML, they can vary in their support for application extensions and technologies, and web servers are kind of differentiated by the operating system support, the server side technologies. Like security models, client support, development tools, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, um, there's a number of web technologies out there, but to kind of keep things realistic and practical, we're just going to kind of look at just a couple of those here. So we're not going to dig in too crazy into these. We're just going to kind of look at like the Apache web server, um, and then the Internet for Information server for Microsoft. So think about it like this. Go ahead and start off with Apache there. So Apache is the most popular technology in the world. I think if I'm not mistaken, there's 60% of web servers on the internet running Apache web server. And while it was originally developed for like a Unix platform in the 1990s, that's since been ported out to other operating systems, and it's very much associated with it and commonly run on Unix and Linux systems. But it has been adapted over the years. So the kind of the benefit when it comes to Apache, right out of the box, Apache supports like a ton of different features and anything from authentication to SSL support, TLS support, HTTP request filtering, typically stuff like that. So there's already some benefit in using it, and it also supports a lot of different modules and stuff like virtual websites. Like friendly error messaging support, integration with external authentication systems, and digital certificate support. So things like that. In the other type of technology that's out there is Microsoft's version, and it's also been available since the mid 1990s. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the current version of IIS is 8. That's the current one. It comes with Windows 2012. And it's evolved so much, and it's an integral part of Microsoft's technology, and And if I'm not mistaken, I think IIS 7.0 and 7.5 were part of the Windows 2008. And again, it's changed so much. And so in many ways, IIS, it resembles Apache, but there are some differences and that can and do occur in between the two. So much like the architecture of Apache, IIS, it implements the same kind of modules that you can see there. Protocol listeners, security support, certificate support, authentication support. So they're very similar um, in their architecture. Um, so in any version of IIS after 6.0, there was only like a handful of listeners and components are installed by default. So this is kind of in response to issues and changes that have risen up since version 5. So prior to 6, the product wasn't considered very modular. It shipped with like all services essentially installed and was ready to be used. So that that's changed quite a bit. So just kind of keep in mind. Just kind of talking about the benefits here, but if I were to ask you a question regarding web servers, two of the most popular forms, Apache Web Server and Internet Information Server would be the answer to that particular question. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. So web applications. So sitting on top and utilizing the different features of a web server is the web application. So you have these web servers, you have Apache, and you have the IIS. So most people ask like, well, what is a web application? And that's kind of the source of a lot of the confusion. So let's kind of address that. So think about it like this. In essence, a web application is software that is installed on top of a web server, and it's designed to respond to requests, to process information, store information, and kind of scale in response to the demand. In a lot of cases, it's distributed across multiple systems or servers to kind of keep up with that demand. As opposed to a few years ago, web applications, basically came in as opposed to, a few years ago, web applications, now they come in 3 different types. You have a browser-based, you have a client-based, and you have mobile apps. So let's take the first one here for the browser-based. It's basically, it'll include code that's been partially processed on the server, but it's actually executed in the web browser itself. So whatever the client is using, whatever you're sitting in front of your computer. So like the application has the ability to access data that's stored on a server as well as your local system, depending on the design. So there's a lot going on there. Then you have like web applications that are client based, and this is essentially the same as the browser based here, but instead of running within the browser environment, they're run as their own applications. So applications that require their own client-side application to be installed prior to using the web application, kind of fit into this category. As far as mobile apps are concerned, they are far the most common encountered application today. Let me say that again. Mobile apps are far the most commonly encountered today, and this can be including the category application typically runs on a mobile operating system, and such as like smartphones, tablets, Apple's iOS or Google's Android. So the question is what do these all have in common? Each one of them in some capacity process information on a server before providing the information to the client. So simply put, the bulk of the processing is done remotely instead of on the client side of things. So think of it like that. So let's move on down. So let's talk a little bit about the client and the server. So understanding web applications basically means that you must also kind of examine the interaction between the client and the server that kind of occurs in this environment. So think of it like that. So you have a server. and you have an application, and it's hosted there, and it's designed to be accessed remotely. You're sitting in your web browser at home. You're trying to access this application from your house on this server, and typically, when you have this setup, it allows multiple client applications. That means that you're not the only person that's out there trying to access that website. There's multiple people. Um, it has to be able to provide that information. So that information is stored on the server with small portions such as like metadata, residing on your client. So what metadata is, it's basically a term that's used a lot, but to make sure that you're absolutely clear on it, let me explain it a little bit. So metadata. To kind of use the technical description, is the data that describes other data, which is kind of like saying, red is red is a type of color, which doesn't really help, you understand that much. And think about this in layman's terms. Metadata can be like easily visualized if you consider a document on a hard drive. So the document contains data like the content of the chapter of a book, which is kind of easy to understand. So metadata in this situation would be the properties of the file itself, which describe the file in terms of size, type, data, author, and other information. So metadata is usually used to enhance the performance of an application because it can kind of speed up the process of locating and using information. So, for example, an index is a form of metadata that gives basic information about something, allowing content to be found and relevant information to be examined. So why do we choose a web-based application over other client server type models? So there's a lot of potential benefits that arise from hosting an environment over others. So one of the biggest benefits is that a client application does not have to be developed for each platform, as in like traditional setup. So a lot of the web applications are designed to be run within a web browser. So the underlying architecture is largely really unimportant. The client can be running a wide range of operating systems and environments, without penalty to the application. There are some web applications that don't run in web browsers and are locked to a specific platform, and these kind of reside on mobile devices. So web application clients are kind of designed for a specific type and version of a mobile operating system, such as like Android, and it can be run only on Android devices, or this can only be run on Apple devices. So when the developers are kind of going through this code, they can change the code to different versions of the client that would be able to kind of access that same data as other platforms are and reside on the server. So let's think about it like this. So let's kind of talk about the cloud just a little bit. So these days a lot of people are hosting web applications in the cloud now instead of actually having the infrastructure. So over the kind of last few years, the cloud technologies emerged. Everything's up in the cloud, and a lot of people are wondering, well, what is the cloud, and how is that going to help me with my web application, that kind of thing. So simply put, the cloud's a model for creating shared resources that can kind of be dynamically allocated and kind of share on demand. So the major benefit here is that the users of a cloud service, they don't need to worry about like the actual details of the setup, just that their resources are there and they're available. And there's a lot of cloud technologies, they're kind of touted at, well, infrastructure as a service, platform for as a service, blah, 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 blah. And, and they can really, revolutionize, businesses. And because, a lot of these items are traditionally hosted in a client server setup, they can kind of, now be hosted in a little bit more flexible environment. So companies, look at the cloud as an effective way of kind of reaping the benefits of a technology without having to deal with all the support. So if you have all this infrastructure out in the cloud somewhere, your company doesn't have to worry about it. So the issues that kind of go with keeping the same services on site are pretty obvious. If you have a small environment, you don't have the infrastructure team, you don't have the people in order to do it. So that's the benefit, but there's still issues to deal with, such as security and legal concerns, and especially if you're dealing with customer data. Is that type of data being secured? And so obviously, these new issues kind of start transitioning. So while people tend to think of a cloud as a place I can put my photos up there, my videos, my documents, and other stuff like that, that's only a small part of what the cloud can really offer. So typically, technologies in the cloud are kind of broken down into categories like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Infrastructure is basically think of it like this. It's a cloud setup that kind of provides the ability to host virtual machines, which have operating systems and applications can be installed. And this kind of model allows for the development of cloud-based firewalls, load balancers, VLANs and stuff like that. So it is the infrastructure of a company. And then you get the platform, and this is usually best suited for developers of web applications. Usually, platform as a service, it kind of provides the hosting and scalability, as well as the standards for development, and the client kind of develops their own application accordingly. And then you have software as a service. So it's usually a model that the client transitions from like locally managed software applications to cloud hosted configurations. So in practice, this is kind of similar like Microsoft Office 365. Now that's out in the cloud. Now that software as a service out there, it's no longer just stored on your local drive. And this has become really popular because of like software management and licensing. It's kind of reduced. The overhead is usually reduced, and it was prior to the adoption of the model in many cases. So that's become so popular these days. So we're kind of just hitting the highlights of web applications, but let's kind of look at this at a different way. So when it comes to web applications, so you have a web application again that's it's designed to run on web servers and send out the output over the internet. So let's kind of look at what they are. So let's talk about the presentation layer. So the presentation layer is kind of responsible for the display and the information that's kind of sent on the client side, on your side. So that's what the presentation layer is. Then you have the logic layer, and that's responsible for it's kind of used to transform and edit and query and manipulate information using forms. If it needs to be stored or presented, then that's what the logic layer is. And then you have the data layer, and the data layer is going to be responsible for holding that data, of the application. So, all these layers kind of depend on the technology, brought to the table in the form of like, HTML, HTTP, and HTTP is the main protocol used to kind of facilitate communication between, the client and the server, and it usually operates over port 80. And then we already briefly talked about 443 and SSL, but we'll probably hit some more of that here in just shortly. So again, we're taking just a general overall look at web applications, and we'll start getting into security and some of the risks that go along with it. All right, let's talk a little bit about cookies. So cookies, while they are necessary for functioning, of just tons and tons of different web applications, they're also a liability. So cookies are commonly used as an attack method for malicious users who use them to target other users, and they try to compromise the overall security of a web application. So the thing about the cookies can't, the importance of how cookies work can't be overstated. Think of it like this: applications that rely on the ability to kind of maintain state information across stateless protocols. So HTTP is a stateless protocol, which basically it's basically the fact that the protocol doesn't keep track of sessions from one connection to the next. So each communication is treated as a separate connection. So cookies are used to kind of maintain that connection. So a cookie it's either used for authentication or data storage. So this is easy to see. It's pretty easy to see why an attacker would kind of want to use this information, because it could allow them to get access to an application through something like session hijacking or something like that. So a lot of attacks we've kind of discussed. And we will continue to discuss further, like a sniffing or cross-site scripting. They can actually capture. So if you're actually using Wireshark or something, you can actually capture cookies that are coming across a network. So kind of expanding on cookies. Let's look at kind of cookies' primary purpose. So it's like I said, HTTP is stateless. So the cookies used to kind of maintain information. So, HTTP wasn't really designed for, and it's kind of incapable of keeping track of the state of information as it moves across like multiple requests or visits to a website or resource. So an application running over what's called a stateless protocol, it needs to keep track of information somehow, and so this is kind of where cookies comes in. Cookies are a way to kind of store information that HTTP is unable to do. So to kind of understand this, think about it like this: a commonly encountered environment like Amazon. So you have Amazon.com. So when someone visits the site, they can log in, to their account, do things, do some shopping. So when a person browses the site and clicks, add something to their cart, next to an item or something, the site does that. That's exactly what it does. As the user moves to the page, to another page, finding other things to add to the shopping cart, they kind of repeat that process. So while this is going on behind the scenes, a cookie stores that information about what's happening on the page, like what items you are adding into the cart. So the web applications is using a special type of instruction for HTTP calling set cookie, which is sent to the browser as a response to the format name. So the browser is going to transmit that information back to the application for each request. So it's going to keep track of that cookie, informing the application about what the user's doing. Hey, they're adding this puzzle or this dog leash or collar, and so it keeps adding these items to the cart in different quantities, prices, colors, and if it doesn't have that cookie, it couldn't continue to see those items being added and keep track of that particular session. So let's kind of make this clear. That it's not that cookies are a bad feature, and they should never be that should never be the implication when it comes to cookies. Cookies have their benefit. They're not necessarily a bad thing. So there's plenty of web applications that do a great job handling cookies safely and securely, and keeping them sensitive information like out of the hands of attackers. So I want to make sure I'm abundantly clear that the statement that a cookie it's just a text file, and there's nothing bad that can come from just a text file with a cookie in it. I don't want to say that it can't be used by an attacker. You're going to kind of see as we move along through this lecture that it can be a liability depending on the information that's inside the cookie. All right, so we are going to pause here and we are going to break this up into a different section. I will be back and we're going to continue to talk about web applications and some of the additional pieces of the puzzle when it comes to web applications.